One lie. That's all it took to destroy a marriage, shatter a family, and send a pregnant woman into the streets with nothing but a suitcase and a broken heart. But here's what nobody saw coming. The person who told that lie was supposed to love him most. This is the story of Miles and Zariah, and how a mother's prejudice became a weapon that nearly destroyed everything her son held dear. Picture this. A glittering American city, where skyscrapers pierce the clouds and dreams are built on ambition and steel. In one of those towers, Miles Graham sat in his corner office, king of his domain, a self-made CEO who had everything: success, respect, and most importantly, a wife he adored. His phone buzzed. A text from Zariah. "Baby kicked again. I think he's got your energy, babe. Can't wait for you to feel it tonight." Miles grinned. That stupid, helpless grin that only love can produce. He typed back quickly, "Our little soccer player. I'll bring dinner. Love you both." Across town, in a sunny kitchen filled with the smell of breakfast and possibility, Zariah Green cradled her swollen belly and smiled at her phone. 9 months pregnant, glowing, and counting down the days until she and Miles would meet their son. She was a marketing executive who just landed a major promotion. A woman who commanded boardrooms with the same grace she brought to Sunday dinners with her family. And Miles? Miles was her everything. Her partner. Her best friend. The man who'd learned to two-step at her cousin's wedding and who'd sat through 4-hour family cookouts without complaint, soaking up the warmth of a community so different from the cold, controlled world he'd grown up in. They were an interracial couple in a city that liked to think it had moved past such labels, but the stares still came. The whispers at his company galas when Zariah walked in, stunning and unapologetic. The raised eyebrows at her family gatherings when Miles showed up, earnest and a little out of place. But they had built something unshakable, or so they thought, because what they didn't know, what Miles couldn't see through his love and trust, was that someone very close to him couldn't accept what they had. Someone who'd been planning, waiting, looking for the perfect moment to drive a wedge between them. That someone was Beatrice Hollis, Miles's mother. Old money, old prejudices, and old enough to know better but too proud to change. Beatrice had perfected the art of the concerned smile, the gentle voice that masked the venom underneath. She'd been cordial to Zariah, polite even, but never warm, never accepting. And as Zariah's belly grew, as the reality of a mixed-race grandchild became impossible to ignore, Beatrice made her move. It was a Tuesday afternoon when she called Miles. "Darling, can we have lunch? Just the two of us. There's something I need to discuss." Miles, always the dutiful son, agreed without hesitation. They met at an upscale restaurant, all white tablecloths and murmured conversations. Beatrice ordered wine. Miles ordered water, his mind already on tonight's dinner with Zariah. Then his mother leaned forward, her face arranged in perfect maternal concern. "Miles, I need to tell you something, and it breaks my heart to say this." She paused, letting the dread build. "I heard something troubling about Zariah at that marketing conference last month. Apparently, she was seen getting very close with a male colleague. Very close. And sweetheart, I've heard whispers about more than just that one night." The restaurant noise faded. Miles's world tilted. His mother kept talking, each word carefully chosen, each detail designed to sound just credible enough. A name he vaguely recognized. A hotel bar. Flirtation that crossed lines. And the unspoken implication hanging in the air like poison gas. What if the baby isn't even yours? Miles should have asked questions. Should have demanded proof. Should have remembered who Zariah was, the woman who texted him baby updates at 3 in the morning. Who'd turned down a job opportunity in another city because she wanted their child raised near both their families. But in that moment, blind panic and decades of conditioned trust in his mother overrode everything else. The drive home was a blur of rage and hurt. He burst through their apartment door like a storm, and Zariah looked up from her laptop, startled, smiling, ready to share some news about the nursery. She never got the chance. "Is it true?" Miles's voice was ice. "Is what true?" Zariah stood, confused, her hand instinctively protecting her belly. "Don't play dumb with me." He was shouting now, And Zariah had never seen him like this, had never heard this tone. The conference. The colleague. How long has it been going on, Zariah? Her face went pale, not with guilt, but with shock. Miles, what are you talking about? What colleague? I don't. But he wouldn't listen. Couldn't listen. His mother's words were too fresh, too detailed, too real. Every denial from Zariah sounded like exactly what a guilty person would say. The argument escalated, voices rising, Zariah crying now, trying to reach him through the wall of accusation and hurt. And then Miles said the words that would haunt him. Get out. Pack your things and get out of my house. Zariah stood frozen, one hand on her belly, the other covering her mouth. Miles, please, listen to me. I would never. Now. The word echoed off their carefully decorated walls, bounced off the framed photos of their wedding, their honeymoon, their life together. And Zariah, 9 months pregnant, betrayed by the man she loved more than breathing, walked to their bedroom and packed a suitcase with shaking hands. 20 minutes later, she stood on the sidewalk outside their building, watching the door close behind her, carrying their baby and nothing else that mattered. So here's the question you need to ask yourself. When the person you trust most in the world tells you a lie, how do you come back from that? And more importantly, what happens when the truth finally catches up? The moment Zariah Green stepped onto that sidewalk, suitcase in hand and baby kicking inside her, she became invisible. Isn't it strange how a city of millions can feel like the loneliest place on earth when the one person who mattered just threw you away? She stood there for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, staring up at the building that had been her home, waiting for Miles to come running out, to say he'd made a mistake, to beg her to come back. But the door stayed closed. The windows stayed dark. And Zariah realized with a cold, sinking certainty that she was truly alone. She pulled out her phone with trembling fingers and dialed the only number that made sense. It rang once, twice, then her sister's voice, warm and concerned. Z, what's wrong? You sound... Monique. Zariah's voice cracked. Can I come stay with you? Just for tonight. I'll explain everything. I need somewhere to go. The pause on the other end lasted a heartbeat too long. And in that silence, Zariah felt the full weight of what had just happened crash down on her shoulders. Get in a cab right now, Monique said. And Zariah heard her moving, heard the urgency. Come straight here. Don't stop anywhere. You hear me? Straight here. 45 minutes later, Zariah was sitting on Monique's worn couch in a neighborhood that felt worlds away from Miles's gleaming high-rise. The apartment was small, cluttered with life, photos on every surface, her nephew's toys scattered on the floor, the smell of dinner still lingering in the air. It was everything Miles's place wasn't. It was home. And as Monique held her while she sobbed, as the whole story came tumbling out between gasps and tears, Zariah felt something she hadn't expected to feel. Anger. Pure, white-hot, righteous anger. Not just at Miles, though God knows he deserved it, but at herself. For believing that love was enough. For thinking that the fairy tale could survive reality. For being naive enough to trust that the man who'd promised to protect her would actually do it when it mattered most. But here's the thing about anger. It can be fuel or it can be poison. And Zariah was determined not to let it destroy her the way Miles's distrust had destroyed them. Over the next few days, as Miles sat alone in his empty apartment, wondering what the hell he'd done, Zariah was building a new life from the wreckage of the old one. Monique's apartment became her sanctuary. Her sister's couch became her bed. And the family she'd always been able to count on closed ranks around her like a shield. Aunties brought food. Cousins stopped by with baby clothes and encouragement. Her uncle, a quiet man who rarely spoke but saw everything, sat with her one evening and said only this: "A man who don't listen ain't ready to be a father, but maybe he'll learn." Maybe. That word hung in the air like a question mark. Because even through her pain, even through her anger, Zariah couldn't quite kill the hope that somehow, someway, this nightmare would end. Meanwhile, across the city, Miles was discovering that success means nothing when you've lost everything that matters. His office felt like a prison. His apartment felt like a tomb. And every single night he lay in their bed, His bed now, he had to remind himself, and replayed that afternoon over and over again. The look on Zariah's face when he'd accused her. The way she tried to reach for him and he'd stepped back like she was diseased. The sound of the door closing behind her. And always, always the memory of his mother's voice at that restaurant, so concerned, so convincing. But doubt had begun to creep in, hadn't it? Because Miles knew Zariah. He'd watched her turn down drinks from interested men at conferences. He'd seen the way she talked about their relationship with pride, with joy, with absolute certainty. And more than that, he'd felt her love in 1,000 small moments. The way she'd rub his shoulders after a long day, the notes she left in his briefcase, the way she'd look at him sometimes like he'd hung the moon. Could someone who loved like that really betray him? Could his Zariah, strong, honest, loyal Zariah, really destroy everything they'd built for a fling with some colleague whose name Miles couldn't even remember now? The questions kept him up at night. They followed him to work. They whispered to him in the shower, over coffee, during meetings where he was supposed to be making million-dollar decisions but couldn't focus on anything except the growing certainty that he'd made a catastrophic mistake. His secretary, Patricia, had worked for him for 7 years. She'd seen him fall in love with Zariah, had organized their wedding, had been one of the first people he'd told about the pregnancy. And she'd watched him fall apart over the past week with growing concern. Finally, on a Thursday afternoon when Miles had been staring at the same email for 20 minutes without reading a word, Patricia knocked on his office door. "Mr. Graham? Do you have a moment?" Miles looked up, and Patricia was struck by how much older he looked than he had 2 weeks ago. How haunted. "Not really, Patricia. I have that conference call in. This can't wait," she said. And there was something in her tone that made Miles pay attention. She closed the door behind her and sat down without being invited. "I'm going to say something, and you're going to listen. When you're done listening, you can fire me if you want. But I'm saying it anyway." Miles sat back, too tired to argue. Patricia took a breath. "That woman you threw out of your home? That beautiful, brilliant woman who's carrying your child? She didn't cheat on you. I know Zariah. I've watched her with you. I've seen the way she lights up when you walk into a room. And I'm telling you right now, whatever you heard, whoever told you she was unfaithful, they lied." The words hit Miles like a physical blow. "My mother wouldn't—" "Your mother?" Patricia interrupted, and now her voice was gentle but firm. "Disapproved of Zariah from the moment she met her. We all saw it, Mr. Graham. The way she'd correct Zariah's stories at dinners. The way she'd bring up other women, old girlfriends, women from good families. Your mother never wanted you to marry Zariah, and everyone knew it except apparently you." Miles opened his mouth to defend Beatrice, but the words died in his throat. Because Patricia was right. He'd seen the tension. He'd felt it. He'd just chosen to ignore it, to pretend everything was fine, to believe that eventually his mother would come around. But what if she hadn't? What if instead she'd decided to end things her own way? "The cameras," Patricia said suddenly. "You installed security cameras for the nursery, remember? The system records everything. If you want to know the truth, maybe you should look at what actually happened instead of trusting what someone told you happened." And with that, she stood up and left Miles sitting at his desk, his heart pounding so hard he could hear it in his ears. The cameras. Of course. Why hadn't he thought of that? Because you didn't want to know? A voice whispered in his head. Because if you were wrong, if you destroyed your marriage over a lie, how do you come back from that? But he had to know. He had to see. Even if the truth destroyed him, he had to see it. That night, Miles sat in his home office with his laptop, pulling up the security footage from the week before the confrontation. His hands were shaking as he navigated through the files, searching for anything, any evidence of what his mother had described. A male colleague, flirtation, betrayal. He watched Zariah moving through their home, her hand on her belly, smiling at her phone. He watched her paint the nursery walls that soft yellow they'd chosen together. He watched her fall asleep on the couch waiting for him to come home from a late meeting. And he saw nothing. No colleague, no affair, no betrayal. Just a woman preparing for her baby. Just his wife being exactly who she'd always been. Then he saw it. A timestamp from 3 weeks ago. the door opening. And there, walking into their home, was his mother. Beatrice moved through the apartment like she owned it, opening drawers, looking through papers on Zariah's desk. Miles felt sick. What was she doing? He watched his mother pick up Zariah's phone from the kitchen counter, scroll through it, put it back down. He watched her examine the nursery with a look on her face that Miles had never seen before. Something cold, calculating, almost cruel. And then Beatrice looked directly at the camera. Had she known it was there? And smiled. A small, satisfied smile that made Miles's blood run cold. She left 20 minutes later, and Zariah never appeared in the footage. Because Zariah had been at work, at the office, doing her job, being faithful, being innocent, being everything Miles should have known she was. The laptop screen blurred as tears filled Miles's eyes. He'd destroyed everything. He'd taken his mother's word without question, without investigation, without even the basic courtesy of letting Zariah defend herself. And why? Because Beatrice was his mother. Because he'd been raised to trust her, to obey her, to believe that she always had his best interests at heart. But what if she didn't? What if the woman who'd raised him was capable of lying, of manipulation, of destroying his happiness because it didn't match her vision of what his life should look like? Miles grabbed his phone, pulled up his text thread with Zariah. The last message from her was from the day before the confrontation. Baby hiccuped at 3 a.m. I think he's got your energy, babe. Can't wait for you to feel it tonight. His response, sent after his mother's lunch revelation, I don't want your excuses. 3 words. That's all it had taken to break her heart. Miles scrolled further back, reading through months of messages. Every single one from Zariah was full of love, excitement, plans for their future. And his responses became shorter and colder after every interaction with his mother. How had he not seen the pattern? How had he been so blind? The answer was simple and devastating. He'd chosen to be blind. Because seeing the truth would have meant confronting his mother. It would have meant choosing his wife over the woman who raised him. It would have meant acknowledging that the person he trusted his entire life had been poisoning his marriage from the inside. With shaking hands, Miles dialed his mother's number. She answered on the second ring, her voice bright and cheerful. Miles, darling, I was just thinking about you. How are you holding up? I know this must be such a difficult time. Stop, Miles said, and his voice was ice. Just stop. Silence on the other end. Then, carefully, Miles? What's wrong? I watched the security footage, Mother. I saw you in our apartment, going through Zariah's things. And I've been thinking about your story, about this colleague you claimed you saw with Zariah. I want a name. I want to know when you saw them. I want every detail. Because right now, I'm having trouble believing any of it was real. More silence. Miles could hear his mother breathing, could almost feel her mind working, trying to decide how to play this. Finally, she spoke. Miles, I was trying to protect you. From what? His voice was rising now, all the anger and guilt and pain of the past week pouring out. From the woman I love? From my wife? From the mother of my child? What exactly were you protecting me from, Mother? From making a mistake. Beatrice's voice had lost its gentle tone, replaced by something sharp and desperate. Miles, you're a Graham. You come from a legacy, from a family with standards and expectations. And that woman, don't, Miles warned. Don't you dare. But Beatrice couldn't stop now. The mask was off, and the truth was pouring out like poison from a lanced wound. She's not one of us, Miles. She doesn't understand our world, our way of life. And now you're going to have a child with her, a mixed child, and what will people say? What will? Get out, Miles said, his voice quiet now but deadly serious. What? Get out of my life. I don't want to see you. I don't want to hear from you. And I swear to God, Mother, if you ever... He couldn't finish. The rage was too much, too overwhelming. He hung up and threw his phone across the room, watching it shatter against the wall. Then he collapsed to his knees on the floor of his empty apartment and wept. Because here's what Miles was realizing in that moment. The truth doesn't set you free when you're the villain of the story. The truth just shows you exactly how much damage you've done, how many lives you've destroyed, how far you'll have to crawl through broken glass to even begin to make things right. And the worst part? He didn't even know if Zariah would let him try. Across the city, Zariah was discovering her own truth. She sat in Monique's bathroom at 2 a.m., unable to sleep, staring at her reflection in the mirror. The face looking back at her was tired, older somehow, marked by the kind of pain that leaves permanent scars. But there was something else there too, something stronger, something that refused to break. Her baby kicked, and Zariah placed both hands on her belly. "It's just you and me now, little one," she whispered. "And I promise you, I will never let anyone hurt you the way your father hurt me. I will teach you what real love looks like, what real trust means, and I will make sure you grow up knowing that you are wanted, you are loved, and you are worth more than anyone's prejudice or anyone's lies." The baby kicked again, as if in agreement, and Zariah felt something shift inside her. Not forgiveness. She wasn't ready for that, might never be ready for that. But a kind of acceptance. A recognition that she couldn't control what Miles had done or what Beatrice had orchestrated. She could only control how she moved forward, how she survived, how she protected this child growing inside her. Monique found her there an hour later, still sitting on the bathroom floor, and sat down beside her without a word. The sisters stayed like that until dawn, shoulder to shoulder, silent but together. Because sometimes strength doesn't look like fighting back. Sometimes it looks like sitting on a bathroom floor at 3 a.m. with your sister, making peace with the fact that the life you planned is gone and the life ahead is unknown. Sometimes it looks like choosing to believe in yourself when the person who promised to believe in you walked away. But Miles wasn't walking away. Not anymore. Because 3 days after that phone call with his mother, after 3 days of barely eating, barely sleeping, barely functioning, Miles made a decision. He had to find Zariah. He had to tell her the truth. He had to beg for forgiveness, not because he deserved it, but because she deserved to know that he knew he'd been wrong, that he'd been a fool, that he'd let his mother's poison destroy the best thing in his life. But finding Zariah turned out to be harder than he expected. She wasn't at work. She'd taken emergency leave. She wasn't at her favorite coffee shop or the prenatal yoga class she'd attended every Tuesday. She'd effectively disappeared, and Miles realized with a sinking feeling that she'd probably blocked his number, deleted him from her life as thoroughly as he'd deleted her from his. That's when desperation kicked in. Miles called Zariah's best friend, her coworkers, even her favorite barista at the coffee shop near his apartment. No one would tell him anything. Either they didn't know where she was, or they did know and weren't about to betray her trust. Finally, in a moment of complete desperation, Miles found himself parked outside Monique's apartment building. He'd been there once before, for a family barbecue where Zariah's relatives had welcomed him with open arms despite their obvious confusion about why their brilliant, beautiful cousin was with this uptight white boy in designer jeans. He'd felt out of place then. He felt like an intruder now. But he had to try. He had to see her. He had to make this right. Miles sat in his car for 30 minutes, trying to find the courage to get out, to walk up those stairs, to face the woman he'd betrayed and the family who'd witnessed that betrayal. What would he even say? How do you apologize for something this catastrophic? How do you ask for forgiveness when you don't deserve it? He was still wrestling with those questions when he saw her. Zariah emerged from the building, moving slowly, one hand supporting her lower back the way pregnant women do when the baby is low and heavy. She was wearing a simple dress, her hair pulled back, and even from a distance, even after everything, Miles thought she was the most beautiful thing he'd ever seen. He got out of the car before he could stop himself. "Zariah!" She froze, turned, and the look on her face when she saw him was like a knife to his chest. It wasn't anger. It wasn't even hurt. It was worse. It was nothing. She looked at him the way you'd look at a stranger, like he was someone she used to know in another life. "What are you doing here?" Her voice was flat, emotionless, and that scared Miles more than shouting would have. "I need to talk to you. Please. Just 5 minutes." "No." She turned to walk away, and Miles felt panic rise in his throat. "I know about my mother. I know she lied. Zariah, please, I know the truth now and I— Congratulations, Zariah said, still not looking at him. You figured it out. Do you want a medal? I want to apologize. I want to explain. Explain what, Miles? Now she did turn around, and the fury in her eyes was like looking into the sun. Explain how you believed your mother over me? Explain how you threw your pregnant wife out of her home without even giving her a chance to defend herself? Explain how you destroyed our marriage, our trust, everything we built together because Mommy whispered in your ear? What exactly do you want to explain? Miles took a step forward, and Zariah held up a hand. Don't come any closer. I can't do this right now. I was wrong, Miles said, and his voice broke. I was so wrong, Zariah. I don't have an excuse. I don't have a good reason. All I have is the truth that I was a coward and a fool, and I let my mother manipulate me because it was easier than standing up to her. Because I've spent my whole life trying to make her happy, and I forgot that the only person I should have been trying to make happy was you. Zariah's eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them back. You know what the worst part is? It's not that you believed her. It's that you didn't even ask me. You didn't give me a chance to explain, to defend myself, to show you that I loved you too much to ever hurt you that way. You just decided I was guilty and threw me away like I meant nothing. Like our marriage meant nothing. Like this baby. Her voice broke, and she placed a hand on her belly. Like our child meant nothing. He means everything, Miles said desperately. You mean everything. I know I don't deserve forgiveness. I know I destroyed something precious and I might never get it back. But I need you to know that I see it now. I see what I did. I see what my mother did. And I'm so sorry. They stood there on the sidewalk, two people who'd once been so close they could finish each other's sentences, now separated by an ocean of hurt and betrayal. Finally, Zariah spoke. I'm going to a doctor's appointment to make sure the baby is okay after all the stress. After being thrown out of my home. After having my heart broken by the one person I thought would never break it. She started walking toward the subway, and Miles followed. Let me drive you, please. Let me at least do that much. Why? So you can feel better about yourself? So you can pretend you're still playing the role of supportive husband? No, Miles said quietly. So I can make sure you and our baby are safe. That's all. No agenda. No expectations. I need to know you're okay. Zariah studied his face for a long moment, and Miles held his breath, waiting for her decision. This moment right here, this was everything. This was the difference between a chance at redemption and losing her forever. What do you do when the person you destroyed is standing in front of you, deciding whether to let you back in? And more importantly, what do you do when you're the one holding all the power, when you're the one who gets to choose whether love gets a second chance or whether some betrayals are just too deep to ever forgive? So Zariah said yes. Not because she'd forgiven him. Forgiveness doesn't work that fast, and anyone who tells you different has never had their heart shattered by the person they trusted most. She said yes because she was tired, because her back hurt, because the subway stairs suddenly looked like climbing Mount Everest, and because somewhere deep down, beneath all the anger and pain, there was still a tiny voice asking, what if he really means it this time? The drive to the clinic was silent except for the hum of the engine and the city sounds filtering through the windows. Miles kept his hands at 10 and 2, his eyes on the road, afraid that if he looked at Zariah he'd break down completely. Zariah stared out the passenger window, watching the city blur past, wondering how they'd gone from finishing each other's sentences to not being able to speak at all. But here's the thing about silence. Sometimes it says more than words ever could. And in that quiet car, with the weight of everything unsaid hanging between them, both Miles and Zariah were asking themselves the same question. Is love enough to rebuild what lies destroyed? The clinic was one of those modern medical buildings trying too hard to look friendly. Pastel walls, generic landscape paintings, magazines nobody reads scattered across tables in the waiting room. Miles held the door open, and Zariah walked through without acknowledging him, checking in at the front desk with a practiced smile that didn't reach her eyes. Zariah Green. I have an appointment with Dr. Martinez at 2:30. The receptionist, a kind-faced woman in her 50s, glanced up and her eyes flickered between Zariah and Miles, clearly sensing the tension but too professional to comment. "Of course, honey. Have a seat. She'll be with you shortly." They sat in those uncomfortable waiting room chairs, the kind that are designed to be sat in for minutes not hours, with 2 empty seats between them like a demilitarized zone. Miles picked up a parenting magazine, put it down, picked it up again. Zariah scrolled through her phone, not really seeing anything on the screen, just needing something to do with her hands. Around them, other expectant parents chatted happily about nursery colors and name choices, their joy a stark contrast to the wreckage of Miles and Zariah's relationship. "Zariah Green?" A nurse appeared in the doorway, clipboard in hand, and Zariah stood, grateful for the escape. Miles stood too, hesitant. "Can I?" "It's fine," Zariah said flatly, and Miles couldn't tell if she meant yes or if she just didn't have the energy to fight about it. They followed the nurse down a corridor that smelled like antiseptic and hope, into an examination room where Dr. Martinez was already waiting. She was a petite woman with kind eyes and steady hands, the kind of doctor who'd delivered hundreds of babies and seen every possible family dynamic. She took one look at Miles and Zariah's body language, and her expression shifted into professional neutrality. "Zariah, how are we feeling today?" "Tired," Zariah said, and it was the truest thing she'd said all day. "The baby's been active, but I've been stressed and I just want to make sure everything is okay." Dr. Martinez nodded, her eyes flickering briefly to Miles. "Let's take a look." The examination was routine: blood pressure, measuring the belly, checking the baby's position. But when Dr. Martinez pulled out the Doppler to listen to the heartbeat, the room went silent in a different way. That steady thump-thump-thump filled the space, and Zariah's eyes filled with tears. Miles, standing awkwardly by the door, felt his chest tighten. That was his son, his child, the baby he'd been so excited about, the future he'd been so sure of, reduced to a heartbeat in a sterile room while the woman he loved wouldn't even look at him. "Strong heartbeat," Dr. Martinez said with a smile. "Baby sounds perfect. But Zariah, your blood pressure is elevated. Not dangerously so, but higher than I'd like to see this close to your due date. Are you managing your stress?" Zariah laughed, but it was a bitter sound. "Define managing." Dr. Martinez put down the Doppler and sat on her rolling stool, looking directly at Zariah with the kind of no-nonsense compassion that comes from years of dealing with complicated pregnancies and complicated lives. "I'm not going to lecture you about stress reduction. You know what you're dealing with. But I will say this: whatever is going on between you two, you need to figure it out fast. This baby is coming in less than 2 weeks, maybe sooner if your stress levels stay high. And when he arrives, he's going to need both of you present and functional. Not perfect, just present." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Miles spoke for the first time since entering the clinic. "We're working on it." Dr. Martinez looked at him, really looked at him, and Miles felt like she could see right through his expensive suit to the mess of guilt and desperation underneath. "Work faster," she said simply. She looked up now, and there were tears in her eyes that looked genuine for the first time Miles could remember. "When you brought Zariah home, when I saw how you looked at her, how she looked at you, I saw something I never had. And instead of being happy for you, instead of celebrating that my son found what I never did, I was jealous, bitter. And I convinced myself that it couldn't last, that it wasn't real, that you were making a mistake. So I decided to end it before it could end you." The confession hung in the air like smoke. Miles felt dizzy with it, with the realization that his mother's cruelty came from her own pain, her own regrets, her own wasted life. But understanding isn't the same as forgiveness, is it? You can understand why someone hurt you and still refuse to let them do it again. Zariah spoke, and her voice was surprisingly gentle. "Mrs. Hollis, Beatrice, I'm sorry you didn't have the marriage you deserved. I'm sorry you felt trapped and unhappy. But your pain doesn't give you the right to destroy ours. Your regrets don't justify trying to break apart a family before it even begins." "I know," Beatrice whispered. "I know that now. I didn't see it then. All I saw was my son slipping away from me, building a life so different from the one I'd envisioned for him, and I panicked. I made a terrible, unforgivable choice. and I've been living with the guilt ever since." Miles reached across the table, but stopped short of touching his mother's hand. "You hurt us, Mother. You nearly destroyed us. And I don't know if I can ever fully trust you again." "I don't expect you to," Beatrice said. "I don't deserve your trust, but I'm asking for the chance to try to earn it back. To be a better mother. To be," her voice caught, "to be a grandmother if you'll allow it." Zariah and Miles exchanged a look, one of those wordless conversations that couples have, and in that moment something shifted. Not healing, it was too soon for that, but recognition. Acknowledgement that families are complicated, that hurt people, that sometimes the path forward means carrying your scars while still choosing to move. "We need time," Zariah said finally. "We need space to figure out our own relationship before we can figure out how you fit into our family. But I'm not going to keep your grandson from you out of spite. I'm not that person. So here's what's going to happen. You're going to respect our boundaries. You're going to support our marriage instead of undermining it. And you're going to examine your own prejudices and do the work to be better. Can you do that?" Beatrice nodded, and the tears were flowing freely now. "Yes, whatever it takes. I don't want to lose you both. I don't want to lose my son. And I don't want to miss knowing my grandchild." "Then prove it," Miles said quietly. "Not with words, with actions. Show us that you're serious about change. Show us that your love is stronger than your prejudice. Because that baby deserves grandparents who will love him unconditionally, not in spite of who he is, but because of who he is." The meeting ended not with hugs or tearful reconciliation. This wasn't a movie where one conversation fixes everything. It ended with Beatrice paying the bill, walking to her car, and driving away while Miles and Zariah stood on the sidewalk, exhausted but somehow lighter. "Do you think she'll actually change?" Zariah asked. Miles considered it. "I don't know, but I think she'll try. And maybe that's enough for now." They walked to their car, Miles's car, but increasingly feeling like theirs again, and drove back to Monique's apartment. But this time, when they arrived, Miles didn't just drop Zariah off and leave. He parked the car, turned off the engine, and looked at her. "Can I come up? Just for a little while. I'd like to meet your family properly. Not as the guy who threw you out, but as the guy who's trying to make things right." Zariah studied his face, searching for something. Sincerity, maybe, or genuine remorse, or just a reason to hope. Whatever she was looking for, she must have found it, because she nodded. "Okay, but Miles? They're not going to be nice to you. They're going to be protective and suspicious and probably hostile. Because that's what families do, they protect their own. Can you handle that?" "I can handle anything if it means being close to you again," Miles said, and he meant it. Monique's apartment was crowded when they walked in. Word had gotten out that Zariah was bringing Miles by, and the family had assembled like an army preparing for battle. Aunties on the couch, uncles in the kitchen, cousins hovering near the door. Monique herself stood in the center of it all, arms crossed, looking at Miles like he was something she'd found on the bottom of her shoe. "So," she said without preamble, "you're the one who threw my pregnant sister out of her home." "Yes," Miles said, and to his credit, he didn't try to make excuses. "I did, and it's the worst thing I've ever done. I was wrong, I was cruel, and I understand if you never forgive me, but I'm asking for the chance to make it right." An auntie, Zariah's Aunt Dee, who'd been a civil rights activist in her youth and didn't suffer fools, stood up from the couch. She was a small woman, but her presence filled the room. "Making it right isn't about what you want, young man. It's about what Zariah needs. It's about that baby who's coming whether you're ready or not. It's about proving that you're the kind of man who deserves a second chance. So what are you going to do? How are you going to be better?" Miles took a breath. "I'm going to listen. I'm going to go to counseling. I'm going to stand up to my mother and anyone else who tries to poison our relationship. I'm going to learn about Zariah's culture and community and stop trying to fit her into my world and instead build a world that fits both of us. I'm going to be present for every doctor's appointment, every midnight craving, every moment she needs me. And I'm going to spend the rest of my life proving that I'm worthy of the gift she's giving me. Not just our son, but her trust." The room was silent. Then Aunt Dee nodded slowly. Words are easy. Let's see if you can back them up. It wasn't acceptance, but it wasn't rejection either. It was the same thing Zariah had given him, a chance, a maybe, a door left slightly open. Over the next week, Miles did exactly what he'd promised. He showed up. He sat through uncomfortable dinners with Zariah's family where they asked pointed questions and didn't laugh at his jokes. He went to another doctor's appointment and held Zariah's hand during the examination, not presuming intimacy but offering support. He started seeing a therapist who specialized in family trauma and toxic relationships, unpacking decades of conditioning and learning to recognize manipulation when he saw it. He wasn't perfect. He said the wrong thing sometimes. He stepped on toes and made mistakes. But he was trying, genuinely trying, and slowly, painfully slowly, Zariah began to see glimpses of the man she'd fallen in love with. The man who'd learned to two-step at her cousin's wedding. The man who'd held her hair back during morning sickness. The man who'd cried when they found out they were having a boy. He was still in there beneath all the damage. And maybe, just maybe, they could find their way back to each other. On a Tuesday evening, exactly 2 weeks after Miles had found Zariah on the sidewalk outside Monique's building, Zariah went into labor. It started as a backache that wouldn't quit, then progressed to contractions that took her breath away. Monique called Miles before calling the hospital, and he arrived in record time, bursting through the door looking terrified and determined. "I'm here," he said breathlessly. "I'm here. What do you need? What can I do?" Zariah, breathing through a contraction, managed a weak smile. "You can drive me to the hospital before I have this baby in your car." The labor was long, 14 hours of pain and fear and moments of doubt where Zariah wondered if she could do this, if she was strong enough, if she was ready to be a mother. And through it all, Miles was there. Not as her husband. They hadn't figured that out yet. But as her partner in this moment, this monumental, terrifying, beautiful moment. He held her hand. He breathed with her. He whispered encouragement when she wanted to give up and celebrated small victories when she found the strength to keep going. And when the doctor finally said, "One more push," when Zariah gathered every ounce of strength she had left and brought their son into the world, Miles was weeping openly, unashamed, holding Zariah's hand like it was the only thing keeping him anchored to the earth. The baby, 7 pounds 3 ounces, with a full head of dark hair and lungs that could wake the dead, was placed on Zariah's chest, and the whole world stopped. All the pain, all the betrayal, all the anger and hurt and broken trust. It didn't disappear. Trauma doesn't work that way. But in that moment, holding their son, feeling his tiny heart beat against her chest, Zariah understood something fundamental. Love isn't about perfection. It's about choice. It's about deciding every day to show up, to try, to do better. Miles looked at his son. His son, this tiny perfect person who existed because he and Zariah had once believed in forever, and felt something break open in his chest. "He's perfect," Miles whispered. "Zariah, he's absolutely perfect." "Yeah," Zariah said, exhausted and elated and terrified all at once. "He really is." They named him Marcus, after Zariah's grandfather who'd fought in World War II and come home to fight for civil rights, and James, after Miles's father who'd been distant but never cruel. Marcus James Graham came into the world on a Wednesday evening in early spring, and his arrival changed everything. Because here's what happens when you hold your child for the first time. You realize that every choice you make from that moment forward is about them. Every relationship you maintain or end, every boundary you set, every time you choose truth over comfort, it's all for them. In the days that followed, Miles and Zariah fell into the exhausting rhythm of new parenthood. Sleepless nights and countless diaper changes and moments of pure terror when the baby cried and they didn't know why. They were learning to be parents while learning to be partners again, navigating 2 impossible tasks simultaneously. Beatrice came to visit in the hospital, bringing flowers and apologies and a humility that seemed genuine. She held Marcus with shaking hands and tears streaming down her face, and whispered, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry I almost missed this." And watching his mother hold his son, Miles realized that forgiveness is complicated, that you can acknowledge someone's wrongdoing while also seeing their humanity. That people can be both the villain of your story and the flawed, damaged person doing their best to be better. It wasn't a fairy tale ending. There were still hard conversations ahead. Still counseling sessions and boundary setting and moments when old wounds would ache. Zariah moved back home 3 weeks after Marcus was born. Not because everything was fixed, but because they both agreed that their son deserved to be raised in a house with both parents trying. They slept in separate rooms for the first month. They communicated carefully, intentionally, like people learning a new language. They went to couples counseling every Thursday and individual therapy on alternating Mondays. They were building something new from the ruins of what they'd lost. Not the same marriage they'd had before, but something stronger. Something forged in the fire of betrayal and tempered by the choice to try again. 6 months later, on a Sunday afternoon, Miles and Zariah took Marcus to the park. He was learning to sit up, grabbing at everything, all gummy smiles and baby laughter. As they sat on a blanket watching their son explore the grass with chubby fingers, Zariah turned to Miles. "Are we going to make it?" she asked. It was the first time either of them had voiced the question out loud. Miles looked at his wife, because she was still his wife. They'd never gotten divorced, had just existed in this strange limbo of legally married but emotionally separated. He looked at her holding their son, strong and beautiful and scarred by what he'd done. "I don't know," he said honestly, "but I'm going to spend every day for the rest of my life trying to deserve you, both of you, and whether we make it or not, whether you can ever fully forgive me or not, I need you to know you were right. You've always been right, and I'm so grateful you gave me the chance to figure that out." Zariah smiled, that real smile he hadn't seen in months, and reached for his hand. "We're going to make it," she said. Not a question this time, a decision, because that's what love is in the end. Not a feeling that happens to you, but a choice you make every single day. So here's what I need to know from you, because this story isn't just about Miles and Zariah. Is it? It's about every one of us who's ever been betrayed or been the betrayer. Every one of us who's made a choice in a moment of weakness that we wished we could take back. Every one of us who's had to decide whether love is worth the risk of being hurt again. What would you do in Zariah's position? Could you forgive someone who threw you out while you were pregnant based on someone else's lie? Drop your answer in the comments, and here's the harder question. Have you ever been the Miles in your own story? Have you ever let someone else's opinion override your own truth? Share your story below, because I guarantee someone else in this community needs to hear it. And if the story moved you, if it made you think about your own relationships and choices, hit that like button and subscribe, because we're building a community here of people who aren't afraid to look at the messy, complicated truth of what it means to love and be loved. Share this video with someone who needs to hear that mistakes don't have to be the end of the story, that forgiveness is possible even when it seems impossible. Drop a comment about the hardest forgiveness you've ever had to give or receive. Let's talk about it. Let's be honest about how hard relationships are and how beautiful they can be when we choose to fight for them. What's your story? I'm listening. We're all listening. Share it below.